Hello, biology. Today we will pretty much totally cover chapter 8 called Photosynthesis. Um, it's going to seem like a real short chapter, but that is fine. This chapter actually goes along with our ninth chapter, which is cellular respiration. And you're going to see some connections with those. You'll see the connections a lot better once we've covered both chapters. Um, there are some Ed puzzle videos that I also am assigning you here in the next few days that will kind of shed some light on some of those connections. And they're things I think you understand. We just have to look at them from a sophomore biology standpoint. Okay. All right. So first thing we need to cover is ATP, which from the survey I had you guys fill out, this was one of probably the least understood according to your guys' feelings. So what is ATP? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Okay. So basically it's a large molecule. And think of it as the energy source for cells. So for your cells to do things, this is what they use as the fuel, basically. Okay. So we've got a 3-part molecule. Okay. In the middle here, we have, lost my cursor. We have ribose, okay, which is a sugar. And this will come into play a lot more in the future when we talk about DNA. You've probably heard that part of the word before in DNA. We have adenine, okay, which also we'll learn more about, and then 3 phosphate groups. And this is where the full name for ATP comes from. Okay, adenosine, referring to this part, triphosphate. Okay, so it means we have 3 phosphate groups. Okay, the key element there is phosphorus. There's also something called ADP, as you can see here. And if you look at the number of phosphates, okay, triphosphate has 3, ADP has 2. Okay, so there the D stands for di, which means 2. So for right now, the way to think of it is just think of it like a flashlight. Okay, we've all had this. We need a flashlight, the power goes out or something, and you reach for a flashlight, and sometimes the flashlight is super bright and does what we need, and sometimes the flashlight is very dim and it still lights up, but maybe not enough for us to use it the way we want to use it. Think of ADP as like that somewhat working flashlight, and ATP as the fully charged flashlight. So it's kind of like, which one's more powerful? ATP is more powerful. So for right now, that's what I want you to understand for ATP. All right, another couple of terms we have to solve before we can further understand not only photosynthesis, but cell respiration are the difference between hetero and autotrophs. Okay, so heterotroph, autotroph. And I think you guys have a pretty good handle. I felt like looking at your survey, most students were pretty decent at telling me they understood what hetero meant. A lot of you said you felt that this term was the opposite of something. Okay, so you're on the right track. Troph means to eat. Okay, so troph here refers to eating something. And so a heterotroph basically means that a living thing gets its energy by eating something different, okay, or eating another living thing. That's what a heterotroph is. So we are heterotrophs. You know, if you think to what you had for breakfast this morning, or lunch or supper yesterday, think back to what you've eaten. Pretty much most of the things we take in as nourishment are living things. Okay, sometimes they are killed and cooked, but they at one time were living, whether that was a plant or some sort of a meat product. Okay, so examples of heterotrophs, of course, you could have human in here, you know, various animals, I'll let you kind of come up with your own 3. It's pretty easy to do. An autotroph, by comparison, auto means, think of the word automatic. So this is an organism that really makes its own food. Okay. It doesn't ingest another living thing to get its energy. It makes its own energy through photosynthesis. Okay. So this would be your plants, right? So you could have an oak tree as an example. You could have a sunflower. You could have seaweed, whatever it happens to be. But for the most part, we're looking at largely the plants that are autotrophs. There are some other creatures that do this too, but we focus on the plants. And so these are the photosynthetic creatures. When we get into food chains and ecology this spring, you'll find that the autotrophs are kind of the first level of that food chain, and heterotrophs make up the remaining levels in those food chains or food webs. All right, so what is photosynthesis? Photo in science refers to, I know you guys might think it refers to like a picture of something, but photo refers to light, which is why a photograph is called that, is because we use light to make the picture. So synthesis here, plants are taking solar energy or sunlight, okay, that's where the photo part comes in, and they are converting that or synthesizing a different type of energy, okay? Stored chemical energy. If you remember from 9th grade, the different forms of energy, like chemical, potential, kinetic, okay? Solar energy is that energy coming from the sun, otherwise called light energy, as you can see in the diagram. And the plants are converting that to a stored chemical energy, which is usable not only by them, but by other life forms. The organelle that helps to do this is the chloroplast. We haven't talked a lot about the chloroplast yet. We've kind of focused mainly on the animal cells. Here is the formula, or the equation, I guess is a better word. This is a chemical equation that shows photosynthesis. And I think a lot of people and students, people in general would look at that and automatically say, I can't figure that out. Okay. It's way too tough. But in actuality, you guys pretty much know this equation. Okay. If I were to ask you, what do plants need? Okay. I think it's pretty unquestionable that plants need water, right? We water plants. If you ever had a plant die because you didn't water it, you know that. Plants need light, which is the energy source, right, from the sun. And plants also take in carbon dioxide. Okay, now if we look at those separately, water, every student knows the formula for water, right? H2O. Most of you should know the formula for carbon dioxide, CO2. And light, we just say light, okay? What do plants create as they take these things in? So they take in CO2, they take in water, they use the light from the sun, and what they create are sugars, okay? Specifically glucose, which is C6H12O6. So 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygen atoms bonded into a big molecule called glucose. And plants also give off this wonderful stuff called oxygen that we need. Okay. And that would be O2. All right. Now, when we look at these 6s in front here, there's a 6 and a 6 here and a 6 here. Remember, those are called coefficients. That means we have 6 total molecules of CO2. Okay. We have 6 total H2Os, right? Water by itself is H2O. So 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. If we have 6 H2Os, then we're going to have 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. So these coefficients are there just to balance the equation. This is something that you covered last year in physical science, probably while we were remote learning. And not only is it probably some of the hardest stuff you learn in 9th grade, it's probably even harder when you're doing it remotely. So I know a couple of you had put on your survey that this was one thing you thought you were couldn't explain to somebody, is the balancing or the equation of photosynthesis. So we'll use this enough, especially when we get to chapter 9, that eventually you'll know it. Okay, so don't get intimidated by it at the moment. One of the ed puzzles I'm giving you does a superb job of breaking it down by atom and showing you how this is all how it's balanced, and how these things here, the reactants, convert into these products. Okay. All right, so why are plants green? You guys read an article the other day about that. Here's why plants are green. Plants contain pigments, okay, various pigments. The one that we focus on the most in biology is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll, that might sound a lot like chloroplast, okay? And it would be because chlorophyll is the pigment that is in those chloroplasts. And chlorophyll is the one that helps the plant do photosynthesis. Okay, basically chlorophyll is what traps the light energy. Okay, the pigment is there to basically harness the sun's energy. And each pigment absorbs certain wavelengths of light. So if we look here, this should look familiar, although it's maybe the opposite way we normally talk about it. Roy G. Biv. You've probably heard that before. These are the light spectrum broken down into the colors that we see, like in a rainbow or a prism. So we have the red wavelengths, which is a longer wavelength here. Okay, then we have orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. Okay, and these lines here are showing two types of chlorophyll, A and B, and we're not going to worry about which one's which. Okay, and then some other pigments, carotenoids, but they show here the percentage of those wavelengths which are absorbed. Okay, so we see, let's just look at the chlorophylls, the blue and green. We see high values here in the violet and blue part of the light spectrum. So that means that 80% of the blue light is absorbed by that plant. Okay, about 60% of the violet spectrum. And we also see some high levels over in the red and orange sections. Okay, so plants are absorbing anywhere from a third to half of that orange and red light spectrum. But where aren't they absorbing a lot? Right here, right in green. That's the lowest. Okay, and so what happens then is the green light is reflected back, not absorbed, so it's reflected back, and that's what we see. And that's how we see colors. Okay, we see colors by the light that is reflected back. So in theory, things don't even have colors. It's just how the light works with our eyes. Very interesting to think that other animals that we see every day don't actually, when we're looking at them and they're looking at us, we're seeing a completely different view compared to what they see. So fall colors, why do we see, some of these other colors in the fall? All right. And the reason is chlorophyll breaks down first. So if you can imagine these lines kind of disappearing, they start to break down, and then we're able to see some of those other colors that normally we can't. So pretty cool. And I think if, something's got to be wrong with you if you don't appreciate the color changes in the fall, right? We get to see some new colors, and it's a sign of cold to come, but it's also, it's pretty to look at. All right, another concept that some of you said you were a little shaky on, you thought was the chloroplast structure. And I get that. We have some new words here. We don't talk a lot about it in cells up to this point. But really, I just want you to know it pretty simply. Okay, the chloroplast is a organelle in a plant cell that is used to harness that light energy and help photosynthesis to occur. So the parts we need to know are thylakoids, which are these little sack-like. They almost look like discs. Okay, if you look at them here, to me they remind me of some candy like Mentos, or what's another kind I like? Spree, Shock Tarts, those kind of ones that come in a roll and you can, unwrap them and eat them. Kind of looks like that. They're stacked. They're actually connected. Okay, and this is where all the pigments are. So the chlorophyll is inside here. Okay, inside these stacks. So, the bigger the stack, obviously, the more chlorophyll, and the more it can do, I suppose, right? A granum is basically a entire stack of thylakoids. So we have these individual thylakoids here. My cursor, there it is. And then we have a stack, which is a granum. All right. And then in between there's this stuff called stroma, and it's a fluid portion. Just so you know, it's not full of air or just empty space. There's a fluid in there that works. So it's kind of like a contained. Well, it's an organelle. It's contained, right? Things are going on in here. So just know those three parts. Okay. What does it remind you of? I don't know, a stack of poker chips here, or some people think about those little coin purses, those rubber things that they give out as advertisement where you can squeeze it and it opens up and you can throw your change in there. Very, very similar to that. All right, so these next two diagrams look a little complicated, but we're gonna look at it from a simple standpoint. Okay, this is right out of your textbook here. So if we look at the photosynthesis equation, okay, we look at the reactants. What is the plant taking in? Right, it's taking in CO2. Cursor, there you are. Okay, it's taking in CO2. It's taking in water through the root system, and it's taking in light, and we are getting glucose made from that, sugar, and we're getting oxygen, right? Okay, but we see the diagram is split in two, okay? And the reason it's split in two is that there are actually two reactions going on, okay? We have the light dependent, which means basically it happens due to light being available, okay? And then we also have the light independent. All right. So do you need to know which one's which? Maybe, maybe not. I think you can still understand the process without, but there's an easy way to remember how this works. If you think about the ones that don't involve light, they're the ones that have the carbon in there, CO2 and the sugar. Okay. And if you think about the things that you need to survive, like right now, okay, you got to drink quite often to survive, right, as a human, and you need to breathe quite often to survive as a human. So those two kind of get put on, go together on the other side of the reaction, okay? So with that said, plant can take in water, plant can take in light, into the thylakoids, into those stacks. Remember, all the chlorophyll is in here. Okay. We can produce oxygen from that, or the plant can. The light independent, the CO2 is coming in. Some things are happening not in the stacks, but in the fluid surrounding the stacks. And sugar is made from there. Okay. So what's all this business here? All right. A lot going on here. Okay. ATP, which we talked about earlier. ADP, which we talked about earlier. And what I want you to understand is we said ATP was the more powerful one, right? The charged flashlight. This little starburst icon kind of tells us that, hey, this is really powerful, right? A lot going on. That gets converted to ADP. We lost a phosphate group, so it's still energy, but it's not quite as much, right? And then notice we can take that ADP and we can cycle it back and convert it to ATP. So we see here a cycle, okay? We use one thing changes to that, and then changes back. So we have a continual cycle here. And we get the same thing here with NADPH and NADP+. Okay, a lot of chemistry there. An advanced biology, an AP bio, college biology, would focus a little bit more on what's going on with those two. Just know that it's kind of similar to this. We have a more energetic compound, and then we have a more or a less energetic compound, and basically it's a cycle as well. Okay, that's really all you need to know with that. So simply, this is really what I would hope you'd be able to do. Could you identify products and reactants and the connection between the light dependent and light independent reactions? And really, we just talked about that, So you could pause the video right now and try to answer that. Go ahead and do that. All right, so what would your answers be? Let's do products. Let's do this side first, the light dependent. Okay, what's the product? What's the reactant? Okay, the reactant is what goes into the reaction, right? So that would be water's going in, sunlight's going in, and the product is what we get out of it. That would be oxygen, right? Plants take in water. We know plants give off oxygen. Okay. On the other side of the reaction, the light independent, a reactant would be CO2, right? Because CO2 is going in. And what's coming out? What are we making? What is our product? Sugars, okay? Specifically glucose. And the connections between the light dependent and light independent would mainly be these changing, this never-ending changing of ADP to ATP, and then ATP to ADP, and then so on. Repeat. Okay, and we get the same thing here. So if you can simply look at a diagram like this and tell what's going in, what's coming out, I think you're good. All right, so some real world applications, because we live in an area of the world where our climate changes, or our weather, I guess I should say, changes seasonally, right? We get close to 100 degrees in the summer. We have grasses and trees and crops and flowers growing super well, right? And then in the wintertime, we get down into some very cold temps, some of the coldest temps in the United States, and we don't see all these plants anymore, right? They're covered up with snow, there's no leaves, all the green is gone. So you might wonder, or might have wondered, what happens to these plants then? So do conditions affect photosynthesis? You bet, okay? So the best temperature for this process to happen of plants taking in light, taking in water, taking in CO2, and making oxygen and glucose, the best range is right here, Celsius for you Canadians. Okay. Fahrenheit for most of us, right? Okay. 32 degrees to 95 degrees is where this stuff happens the best. So a range of about 70 degrees. No, 60. Holy cow. Okay, 60 degrees. So what do we know about 32? Water freezes, right? So it kind of makes sense that those processes where water is a major reactant would probably not have the best results at a temperature below 32, right? Sorry. 95, we're starting to get into some hot temps and water evaporation occurring. And so plants tend to hold on to water when it gets a little too hot. Okay. Some of these processes get a little halted because they need to take care of themselves, and they need to hang on to some of these things. Okay. So, temps in our springs and our summers and our early fall, those are when we see green plants, right? Light intensity can affect it. If If a plant is subjected to small amounts of light, obviously that will not allow those reactions that occur in the chloroplast to resume. Okay, we need light there. So if a plant is cut off from light, maybe it's in a house, not by a window, and or put in a dark room. Okay, water availability as well. So maybe water just isn't available. We see currently in our area we've had hardly any rain or any snow. It's been very dry the past few months. Okay, our plants now are kind of in their dormant stage, but if this were to be happening in the summertime or something like that, plants would have to make some changes. Okay. In fact, plants that live in places that don't have a lot of water, such as deserts. Okay. Most people, when they think of a desert and they think of something living there, they might think of a cactus. Okay. So we can see a few ways that cactus or cacti deal with low water availability. Okay. Their root system, shallow and widespread. Come here. To basically reach out and grasp any water that they could find, since it is so scarce. Spikes to prevent creatures from eating them. Okay. A thick, waxy skin. If you remember back when we talked about lipids, okay, wax is a kind of lipid. And remember, lipids don't mix well with water. So a thin, waxy coat on there is going to help basically hold the water inside. So whatever water the cactus can get, it stays there. And then a large fleshy stem to retain some of that water. Around here, we don't have a lot of cactus naturally, but we do have conifers, which are cone-bearing trees, evergreens, firs, spruces. Think of the trees that you might put in your house for Christmas. Those have a needle instead of a leaf. And that needle, next time you're by a pine tree or a spruce tree, if you have a real Christmas tree in your house, grab one of those branches and squeeze it gently. Okay. And you'll feel it's kind of waxy. It's kind of sticky. All right. And that's to keep that water in. And this is why we call them evergreens, right? Is because they are green even in the winter, even when these temps are low. And so they do actually continue to photosynthesize, not to the extent they would during a summer season. All right, so that is the end of Chapter 8. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, we will review this stuff in class. So, if you have those questions, be ready to ask them. We'll run through these slides at our next meeting in person. All right. Have a great weekend.